Thanks very much. I'm sure hope you can hear me okay.
Clearly.
It's good to see everyone. It's been great discussions. Thank you to BGN Guild for such interesting presentations. It's been great to be part of today. I'm talking about assessment and feedback, question mark. AI in assessment and feedback. The question mark is very intentional. Been working on a project for this past year, and the jury's still out really, so I'm going to talk through our approach to the project, what we've been doing, and you'll see what for sure why there's a question mark on this title. Just want to say hello to all my colleagues as well who've joined today, and it's great. Thank you for supporting me. So I'm Adele Cushing. I'm a senior digital education consultant at Birkbeck University of London. I've worked in the field of digital education for a very long time now, and I'm going to start with my personal interest in AI, which because it reminded me of when the internet was invented. So there you go. That shows how long I've been doing learning technology. I started as a teacher once the internet was in existence, and the way that AI has kind of happened so rapidly, I just wanted to kind of join in, discover it, and see how we can use it for teaching and learning. That's really my passion. Also about how we can use it in our sort of daily operations, maybe thinking about how it can support us and support cognitive load and things. And I knew about Teachermatic as a AI for education tool. I'd followed it in my own time in terms of their use in schools and colleges for a couple of years. And then this past year at our organisation, we'd had a very small pilot of using Copilot as well. And so I'd been fortunate enough to kind of get involved with that. And I see the work that I've been doing investigating these tools as a contribution to what will ultimately be university policy and approach, but we're taking quite a careful evaluative approach to it, and this project was contributing to some of that consideration and decisions. So someone mentioned OpenAI earlier. Certainly AI LLMs, it can be fairly easy to build systems on top of it if you know what you're doing, but then whether they last or not, or as I think it was Phil was saying, is it sustainable? So we did some due diligence and asking about the business of Teachermatic. So there's it belongs now to a Swiss organisation, learning organisation, been around for several years. It was one of the tools that JISC advertised as, would you like to pilot this for higher education and give us some feedback? Some of the other tools in that toolbox have not lasted the distance this year. They don't exist anymore, or they didn't have funding for. So I'm glad that we picked Teachermatic, and we had the opportunity to work within a controlled environment. So just as we've been using Copilot for our day-to-day work, and that exists within the Microsoft ecosystem, and so that's protected. Teachermatic also, we had to find out if we upload anything of our own, what happens to that? Does it train any other AIs that exist or LLMs that exist? And the answer to that was no. So we knew we were kind of working within a controlled environment. So we were given, so I wrote a bid to JISC and said, I'm aware of Teachermatic, I'd like to use it. They had sort of 50 licenses that I'm going to give out, and it was very short termism as usual. For last summer to start a project at the beginning of the academic year. So I didn't feel all that confident I was going to be able to find 10 users at Birkbeck. So we partnered with the Bloomsbury Learning Exchange, which is run by Sarah Sherman, and it exists to support digital learning across multiple organisations within the University of London and other parts of London as well. So you can see all the organisations here that were part of our project and pilot, and I've there was 5 of us running the project because we had to set it up in terms of pilot leads within all of these organisations, and then a couple of project managers, myself and Sarah, and then we had Kat, who was doing training in terms of how to use Teachmatic and what could be used for, and then we had we were very fortunate to have and some administrative help from Yasmin as well at that time. So Teachmatic has got over 200 made for education generators. These are the kind of key themes that exist within Teachmatic. So you can choose whether you want to use something within management, higher education, administration. The focus of this particular project was for using Teachmatic for assessment and feedback in higher education, and that was what we were investigating. So we didn't have much of an opportunity to use the multiple generators. We had sort of 4 that we were particularly asked to look at. I'll show you those in a second. But there's a kind of a broad scope here, and it is one of the reasons why we're at Beck are going to continue our project with a small amount of licenses into the next year, because we didn't have time to kind of look at it more broadly in terms of what it could do. So this is just a summary, and we're in the process, the summary of the project, and we're in the process of pulling together all of the results and outputs. And I've got some of the outputs in progress at the moment, but hopefully by the end of this presentation you'll have some helpful guidance and things to think about if in the future your organisation would consider using a tool like this. So we've got some practical outputs that I'll be able to share with you at the end of our of this presentation. So when I originally wrote the bid, we said that we would trial Teachmatic across multiple disciplines and assessment types. We'd think about how it could support marking and generate personalised feedback, and you'll see from the results that actually it's the feedback piece that's been most successful. It fitted within the aims that we had at Birkbeck in terms of thinking about our assessment approaches, how they're timely and supportive, and so we had a bit of a focus on that. So using a tool like this was seen to be supportive of that kind of key aim for the organisation. And then so we were thinking about different use cases, staff and student perspectives. Well, as you will see, the student perspectives are few and far between, because we had to be very careful about how we were going to use this and the process that we would take, and if not, and usually not, we were going to upload any student work, and so that was few and far between. And so yeah, you'll see. Anyway, so we were wanting to think about comparing AI supported workflows against traditional assessment workflows, if they can complement each other. And then, as I say, there's some resources that we're now building, and then within the project we managed, to successfully develop a community of practice, and the kind of pilot leads within the organisation had their sort of network of champions. Okay. So I'm in the process of putting these together at the moment to adaptable training plans for generative AI use in HE. That's something that we want to kind of make available through JISC for the HE community. We've already got some case studies from specific disciplines, and as I say, I'll share those at the end. We'll have 3 podcasts. I think 2 of them are published. The one that we just published today is from 2 of our academics who've talked about their experience of using Teachmatic, and the human-led AI adoption framework that's also in development, and hopefully again we'll have some useful guidance for people. So as I say, we had sort of a central project team And then we had my colleagues supporting the training and admin, and our pilot internally, and then pilot leads from other organisations. We had quite a lot of evaluation forms from JISC, and in the end we had a meeting with the leads from JISC to pull together all our thoughts. And it was interesting because we had the 50 licenses, and then we split up into 3 terms throughout the year, and we had different people using it at different terms in terms of whether they were teaching or not. Also, people who were using it for kind of assessment, more formal assessment, they would end up using it right at the end of the year, whereas people who wanted to use it for content creation and assessment, so creating rubrics, MCQs, etc., they were using it more throughout the year. And in terms of rubric creation and feedback and MCQs, it was actually really, really successful in terms of what it can do, and supported the academics in terms of, you know, having creative assessment practices and activities. These were the main generators that we were asked to sort of focus on in terms of the original remit from JISC, but we then also we gave our participants the scope to think about whether they would compare what Teachomatics outputs were like if they were already using other AI systems. So Copilot got a mention from some organisations that were already using Copilot. And so people had that option to kind of compare outputs with other LLMs, but also to think about how they might want to approach the project. So we very much took a lead from our academic participators, which I was very grateful for, because, you know, one of the big considerations that we had at the beginning was, you know, how are we going to manage making sure that students know if AI is being used or not in their assessment process. The worst case scenario is that we use it for kind of final marking, and you know, then there's some kind of complaint comes through. So that made me panic, and I was like, no, we can't do that. We've got to think about how we can frame this so that those risks are really mitigated. We stay well away from those. And so what we found was just having this collaborative approach with our academics, and they were saying how they would be able to lead that kind of trial within their own area, and what kind of communication or paperwork they might use with their students if it was needed. And actually at Birkbeck, we didn't use anything for summative assessment. We had a few academics from the pilot who marked work and then put it into Teachomatics to kind of do a comparison as to whether it was going to come up with the same kind of marking. And actually it was disappointing in terms of being a bit middle ground. So around like 2-1 marking. So that word got around. People didn't really use it much in that way, and so it was mainly used for formative rubric creation, which helped people to kind of write consistent rubrics, and also have the AI using as an assistant so that they could clearly see if they needed to better differentiate their rubrics, and so that they kind of I think AI as an assistant, kind of a two-way conversation, can be really powerful and enhancing your own work. And the lecturer who's in the podcast that I mentioned, he created multiple choice questions, and his stories around that are really interesting. And so that he found that to be successful, and he wants to carry on with that into the next academic year. So this is a screen grab of what Teachomatics looks like, and if we've got time at the end, I'll show you the actual real system. Essentially, it means you can select your area of education. You can upload some documentation and kind of train it in terms of, like, this is my assessment brief Can you help me create an activity? So it will work with you in that way. And then you choose the kind of output. So you can do worksheets or you can do rubrics. So that was how people were using it. So the biggest challenge we had at the beginning, because this was brand new, it was brand new for us using an AI tool. Any tool that we have to have a data process impact assessment, not protection. I've just realised there's a typo there. So the data process impact assessment, as I say, we had to identify what was happening with any data information that was being uploaded. And that was one of the reasons why we kind of made an agreement that we weren't going to upload any student work, but if people did, it was anonymized and it was just done for comparison. And then it's a quick turnaround in terms of getting that deleted. So we just put a request to Teachmatic in terms of getting that deleted. But also, if that was happening with any student work, that the students would be informed about that. So there was a bit of a delay from some of our project participants, because different organizations have different ways of making sure that that's managed. And then we've got Moodle integration, which we didn't have time to kind of evaluate. That's key in terms of our virtual learning environment. But the current situation with that is that even if it sits within a tool, and you still have to sort of copy and paste the outputs into the other Moodle tools. So we're going to give it a go for a bit longer into the next academic year, see if Teachmatic can improve those things. And then the policies with student assignments, as I say, because we had this sort of network, we were meeting 3 times a term, and then people who were joining the next term would hear from the first term how the academics had gone and how they'd approach things. So people were able to kind of create their own ways of doing things within this remit of data protection. So these are some of our initial observations that came through, and so generative AI and learning prompting, that can take time and effort, and the Teachmatic form and the layout, we found that people were really grateful that they had an opportunity to engage with generative AI, whereas they hadn't necessarily before, and learn about prompting, because the form would prompt them to give the context of what they were trying to do. And then those people who also had access to Copilot and maybe had been limited in their prompting in Teachmatic, but they'd worked out what else they needed to say to get a more precise output. So it was good in terms of helping to learn AI literacy and prompt engineering. That was something that was probably most appreciated. And then obviously sort of the student trust and transparency. We talked about that a lot, as I say, in terms of sort of the data process and things. And I think that we kind of concluded that we just all had to be open and transparent about the fact. So if AI is used, you declare it. And that's something that's coming through quite clearly in our final report. And Gen AI is most useful when it supports academic judgment, not when it replaces it. It was never going to be the case that AI would decide someone's mark or final grading. In fact, we concluded that AI tools should not be used for final grading. But there's a recognition, as I say, that when you use a tool like that for a two-way street, that it can inform decision making. The outputs. So again, assessment design matters more than tool choice on these things. And as I say, on the podcast, there's a story about how using a tool like this to generate multiple choice questions might actually protect against answers from other AI systems and students using other AI LLMs for answers, because you can train Teachmatic with your own notes and lecture notes, and it stays within that environment, and then students will get their answers as long as they've engaged with your lecture notes, rather than going out to the LLMs that are trained by perhaps incorrect information on the World Wide Web. And then, so some of the other outputs, we evaluated was that level 4 was more accurate, and the outputs for level 6 and 7 were a bit too simplistic, particularly for applied questions, scenario synthesis tasks, or multi-factor reasoning. And we concluded that that's because Teachermatic has been traditionally used in schools and colleges. They wanted us to let them know whether it was going to be good for higher education or not. In some areas of higher education and some assessment types, yes, and in others we've given them a list. We have given them a list of things that they might want to try and improve. And again, that's another reason why we want to extend our project into the next year and see if some of these things can be improved and how we can give feedback to them to do that. And then in terms of the fact that they were asking, does it save you time? Well, I think we concluded sort of mid-project that it was perhaps a workload reallocation rather than a workload reduction. But there were some things that that saved some time. So the MCQs for sort of final assessments got drafted quite quickly. The academics felt supported in terms of drafting feedback and kind of more regular feedback. But then, you could take the time back because you had to learn how to use the system. And then there were some outputs that needed substantial editing. And then, as I say, we've concluded that this use could inform decision making about great assignments, but shouldn't be used only for final grading. So this is a summary of some of the feedback that we had through our more formal evaluation. So there was 50 users, but only 10 people filled out the final evaluation, which is, usually the case at the end of an academic year. Everyone wants to go on holiday. So we've kind of got to use it in context, but it certainly gives me more of a perspective than the 5 responses I had a few weeks ago when I had to do a presentation to our academics at work. So you'll see here this is some of the feedback. But again, because of the sort of low numbers of feedback, kind of jury's out really, and that's another reason why we wanted to extend for Birkbeck our project. Now, part of that is because out of the 10 people, 3 people from Birkbeck filled it out, and they were the ones who said yes, I would use it again. Whereas there were 7 people out of 10 who said no, I'm not gonna bother. But I kind of feel like with a bit more partnership with Teachermatic and feedback to them, and the fact that they are very responsive, that they could end up in a situation this time next year where some of those other partners in our project might consider coming back to this. I'm just giving a minute to see if I want to pull any of those out, and I'm just going to take a pause just in case anyone wants to make a comment about what's on the screen right now, rather than reading it all out. Okay, so I said that we would be sharing some practical advice, and we started this off really before sort of a formal policy or permission. So, but the sponsor for this project was my line manager, and we make a case working with JISC that sort of the outcomes of this is good promotion for the university, that we minimise the risk with a controlled environment, and So we had to make sure that there was no identifiable student data, that students had been clearly informed, that this was used mainly for formative assessment, although formative and summative was talked about before, but then Teachermatic themselves told me that it was mainly to be used for formative assessment. But also that some staff used it as their own kind of assistant, as I said, if they didn't have access to any of the other kind of AI tools on trial. And then sort of thinking about the final output from Teachermatic, and that there was always a human checking it, and that no student was given an AI generated response. But certainly in terms of the rubrics, again, the sort of consistency of marking, the consistency of tone, I think, and the fairness in terms of, marking fatigue and lecturers marking 200 or 300 papers, and being fair and giving the same kind of energetic feedback to the first one as to the last one, and how AI kind of supported them to be able to do that. And I guess also, if there was any kind of anything coming back, we did encourage the lecturers to kind of keep a record of what prompts were or how they used it, just in case there was anything to follow up with another time. But because it was formative assessment, I think in the main, from what we did hear, which was anecdotally from the students, they were just pleased that they were kind of getting that kind of regular, consistent feedback. So at the moment, as I say, we're reporting outcomes and sharing resource outputs with JISC. We're going to have a phase 2 of this project at Birkbeck. I want other members of other teams in academia to use Teachermatic. It does quality, it does administration, it does management. And so to kind of use some of those generators across the board, not just in academia, but through professional services. I'm looking at you, Elizabeth. So yes, so to try and kind of vary those opportunities of use and see what it can do for us, but also to maybe try and dig deeper into sort of some of the academic exploration. Someone asked me about what you're saying, it helped consistency. What kind of consistency was that? And actually, as I say, it was more about tone, consistency of tone, but also fairness in how much feedback people were getting from their lecturers. And then we are continuing with a co-pilot pilot, so we carry on comparing with that, and as I've said, some of the academics who use other LLMs, so outside of Birkbeck, they've sort of said, oh, I could persuade Teachermatic about what the marks were going to be. You can hear that again on one of our podcasts, and felt like they could revise prompts better within other LLMs like Copilot. But starting off within something like Teachermatic, as I say, that's got that framework, was a good starting point for anyone who'd not really engaged with AI yet. And then again, sort of the critical evaluation of outputs, and the fact that the staff were being really critically evaluated. All of our meetings were just rich with, this is what I did, this is the approach I took, this is what Teachermatic did well, and this is what it really didn't do well. And a lot of that applies to generative AI generally, really, in terms of its lack of nuance and things. So anyway, that's why we're carrying on, and I've got to now share this nice link. I'm going to share this nice link with you all, so that you can engage with some of the resources that we've already created, and we'll let you know when the other resources are available through JISC.